Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a bit of a calm, atmospheric journey back in time to explore the origins of infectious disease containment. We're going to unpack a concept that has quietly shaped human survival for centuries. I mean, way before we even understood what a virus or a bacterium actually was.
So, let's start with a really simple question. Where does the word quarantine actually come from? We hear it all the time, we know exactly what it means in practice. To stay away, to isolate, right? But what you might not know is that this everyday word hides a deeply numerical and geographical past. It's this incredibly fascinating story of maritime empires, historical observations, and just sheer human survival.
Section 1. Dubrovnik invents the Trentina. Let's dive right into this.
To find the absolute origin of this concept, we have to travel back to the 14th century Republic of Ragusa. Today, you'd know it as Dubrovnik in Croatia. The year is 1377, and the world is just reeling from disastrous plague outbreaks. Now, our story anchors on a specific number, 30. The authorities in Dubrovnik, well, they obviously didn't have modern medical knowledge. They didn't know about pathogen infection cycles or the etiology of diseases. But what they did have was brilliant empirical observation. They just noticed that isolating people seemed to stop the spread. So they mandated a strict 30-day isolation period to see if newcomers would develop symptoms before entering. They called it a Trentina, which simply comes from the Italian word for 30.
And listen, this wasn't just some vague suggestion. It was hard-coded into strict law. The Grand Council of Dubrovnik issued an ordinance that's actually preserved in their Liber Viridis, the Green Book. It laid out 3 incredibly strict steps. First, you isolate travelers from plague-endemic areas for exactly 1 month. Second, absolutely forbid citizens from visiting anyone in isolation. And third, if an unauthorized person so much as delivered food to the isolated, bam, they were penalized with a 1-month isolation themselves. This early system was frankly an administrative masterstroke. It acted like a bureaucratic firewall against contagion, perfectly designed to protect the city without completely removing it from the map of global trade.
Section 2. Venice perfects the quarantena.
Fast forward a bit to the mid-15th century. The knowledge of Dubrovnik's anti-plague measures has now transferred across the Adriatic Sea directly to the bustling maritime trade hub of Venice. Venice essentially adopts Dubrovnik's brilliant idea, but decides to extend that isolation period from 30 days to 40 days. Now, in the Venetian language, the word for 40 is quaranta, and it is exactly this Venetian 40-day mandate, the quaranta journey, that permanently minted the very word we use today, quarantine.
If we lay this out and trace the evolution of this vital infrastructure, it paints an incredible chronological picture. In 1377, Dubrovnik issues that first 30-day ordinance. Jump to 1423, and Venice officially opens the Lazaretto Vecchio. That was the world's very first permanent quarantine island, built specifically to manage the huge problem of the plague arriving by sea. The system was just so effective and became so widely recognized internationally that by 1663, the word quarantine officially landed in the English dictionary, defined specifically as a 40-day period of isolation.
Moving on to Section 3. Herbs and the Beaked Mask.
Okay, to understand one of the most iconic and honestly most misunderstood visual symbols of this era, I'm talking about the 17th century plague doctor attire introduced by French physician Charles Delorme in 1619, we have to get into the science of the time. The prevailing theory was miasma. Historically, people genuinely believed that a noxious form of bad air was the main cause of disease. They thought the plague was literally being carried in the foul, terrible smells of decaying bodies. So that iconic mask? It wasn't designed to filter out microscopic germs at all. It was entirely designed to filter out smells.
And that is exactly why those masks had those famous, terrifying beaks. Those half-foot-long leather beaks were literally stuffed with a soothing, fragrant botanical mix. They'd use dried roses and carnations, lavender, peppermint, camphor, myrrh, and even sponges soaked in vinegar. The whole idea was that as the doctor breathed through the 2 little holes in the beak, the herbs would counter the evil smells of the miasma and miraculously prevent infection. It was basically wearable potpourri.
Now here is the absolutely crazy part. While their theory about bad air was completely wrong, their suits actually did work to some extent. The wide-brimmed hats identified who they were, and the wooden canes allowed them to examine patients and lift clothing without making physical contact. But the real game changer? The long robes they wore were made of waxed Moroccan goat leather. That waxed leather effectively functioned as early protective gear. It created this slick, impenetrable barrier that prevented the true carriers of the bubonic plague, which were infected fleas, from clinging to them while also shielding them from infectious droplets.
Accidental genius. All right, let's jump into Section 4, Lazaretto Vecchio, Time Capsule.
Let's shift our focus back to the actual quarantine facilities themselves, specifically the archaeological reality of the Lazaretto Vecchio Island in the Venetian lagoon today. I want you to think about the number 1559. It's a fascinating number. For 300 years, this island was the primary containment and burial site for suspected infectious disease cases in Venice. Historical records tell us that during the catastrophic plague of 1576 alone, an estimated 50,000 people died in Venice in a single year. Yet modern archaeologists have only ever excavated 1559 bodies on the island. So where is the rest of the mortality signal? Why aren't there massive overflowing plague pits like we see in London or Marseille?
To decode this giant historical discrepancy, researchers propose two complementary theories. First up is what they call the Ellis Island effect. This suggests the island functioned mainly as a routine maritime border filter. So, the burials we actually find are mostly adult male travelers and merchants who were intercepted at the border during normal steady-state times. But what about during those massive crisis surges? Well, that brings us to the second theory, the Secret Republic fire. This hypothesis suggests that when the death toll surged into the thousands, the Republic enacted hidden emergency mass creations completely outside the official administrative record. Why? To manage the chaos and prevent absolute civic panic.
And we actually have a chilling eyewitness account to back this up. In 1576, the Venetian chronicler Rocco Benedetti wrote, and I quote, "In the island of Lido, at the location of Cavanella, a cemetery was erected, where inside deep trenches were laid down bodies to burn." He detailed how they literally layered the bodies with live lime and soil to burn them rapidly. The Venetian Republic discreetly disposed of their own residents to maintain the illusion of control and social stability, leaving the official quarantine island solely for those intercepted travelers.
Finally, Section 5, a legacy of containment. You know, these 14th and 15th century maritime inventions didn't just fade away into history books. They literally built the foundation of our modern world. As global trade expanded, it became obvious that no single port could manage outbreaks alone. This forced the old harbor quarantines to evolve. Fast forward to today, and we have international frameworks like the World Health Organization and the International Health Regulations established in 1969. They rely on sharing rapid risk assessments, coordinating responses at ports, and managing disease across highly interconnected borders. And we still see the exact same vulnerabilities in maritime travel today, like in 2026, when an outbreak of Andes hantavirus occurred on the cruise ship MV Hondius. The core principles of containing a floating, interconnected environment, they are exactly the same as they were for those Venetian harbor masters centuries ago.
Which brings us to a final lingering thought to wrap up this explainer. How did a simple medieval maritime rule permanently rewire human evolution and global health? Think about it. That simple shift from a 30-day Trentina to a 40-day Quaranta didn't just give us an everyday word. It created an institutional immune system. It proved that human governance, logistics, and the incredibly simple act of creating a physical barrier could literally alter the evolutionary trajectory of deadly pathogens. It's an incredible reminder that sometimes the absolute most powerful tool we have against the microscopic world is just a well-organized, structured human response. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.